What is up, my peepholes? This is your guy, Cly, and it's time for a little DIY. Today, I'm going to be making another dice set, and this time I'm going to be filling them with meeples. Though, not these meeples. Nor will I be using any of the meeples that I make with my excess resin. Instead, I'm going to be using what I call nano meeples. These are about 5 millimeters long and 2 millimeters thick, and they are just perfect for filling dice. If you're wondering where I got those, the truth is I made them using these molds right here. As for where I got these molds, I made them using a 3D printed master that sadly has been lost in the time between when I made these molds and when I started work on this video. That doesn't mean I can't show you how I actually made the meeples using these molds, so first I start with 4 milliliters of resin, which I have found to be the perfect amount to fill all 10 of the molds that I have. Next, I add just a dash of colored mica powder. After I've mixed everything together for 2 minutes, the time has come to fill the molds. Now, because I don't want to waste a syringe on just 2 milliliters of resin, I instead use my stirring stick to dose the resin out into each of the mold's indentations. Once I've done that, I use a toothpick to scrape off any excess resin while at the same time guiding that resin into any of the underfilled cavities. Once I've filled all 10 molds, I pop them in the pressure pot for 24 hours. Now, I'm going to be saying the word meeple a lot during this video, and I thought it would be a good idea to provide a little bit of context since not everybody's heard of them. And by the time this video is over, it's probably just going to start blending into the background. So meeples are these vaguely anthropomorphic pieces that you're going to find in all kinds of board games, though most people know them from Carcassonne. For those wondering, yes, I did get this for $2.50 at a local thrift store, and this is nowhere near my best find. And while I haven't made a thrifting video in a while, I do have a playlist that I'll link to now, and that series might be reappearing in the not too distant future. Because even if I don't find a lot of things these days, I still have a massive backlog of thrifting finds to get through, especially board games and RPGs. And for those of you wondering about the jar of meeples I showed you earlier, these are what I call my experimeeples. Not only do I put the excess resin from all of my dice casting in these little molds, which I should point out, they're starting to wear out. I made these using meeples from an incomplete board game I have lying around, but that was before I got my hands on a 3D printer. I need to make some proper meeple masters next. Back on topic, not only are these meeples made from excess resin, but I also use this as a way to test different resin pigments, since meeples only take up 2 milliliters of resin. Some of my favorites include the money meeples that I made in my last dice making video, as well as this one made using holographic nail powder. Of course, that stuff is ridiculously expensive per gram, so we'll see if I end up using it in a dice set. Then there are abominations like this one, which was made using 2 different materials I'm testing for a future dice making video, and I'll keep secret for the time being. For this project, I'm going to be using Alumilite Amazing Clearcast, not a sponsor, the Nano Meeples, this container has a little over 200 of them, a mixing cup, a stir stick, at least 1 set of tweezers, I'm using reverse action tweezers, and finally, you're going to need a set of dice molds. Once again, I'm going to be using the cat molds I designed, and I'm hoping to have a video about those in the not too distant future. To keep things simple, I'm just going to be making the D6 for this video. And because of that, I don't need to mix up an entire batch of resin. In this case, I'm only going to be mixing up 6 milliliters. Once I've thoroughly mixed the resin, in come the meeples. Now before I start putting the meeples into my mold, I do want to make sure to brush just a little bit of resin into the mold so that I can keep the meeples from pressing directly against the sides. I'm going to start off by using one of my pairs of tweezers to individually pick up each of the meeples and place them into the resin, making sure to work in groups of 4 because I want to keep my color counts identical. Next, I stir my resin with the meeples in it to make sure they're fully coated. And finally, I pick out the meeples using my second set of tweezers and drop them into the mold one at a time. If you're wondering why I'm going out of my way to use 2 sets of tweezers, that's because I don't know exactly how many meeples are going to be needed based on how they fall into the mold, and I'd rather not coat any of the unneeded meeples in resin. Once the mold's nice and full of meeples, I'm going to overfill my mold just a little bit so that I can make sure no air bubbles get trapped as I cap it. And of course, any of the excess resin that gets pushed out of the mold can be scraped into the reservoir. As per usual, any unused resin left in my cup is going to be placed in a meeple mold. Now to put these in the pressure pot for the next 24 hours. And there you have it. Now, I'm going to go ahead and admit, when I first started this project, I wasn't sure I was going to like how they turned out, but the color combination definitely sold me on these. If you're wondering why I chose to go with red, green, blue, and yellow, the main reason is just because that's a pretty common color combination in board games. However, because I make the meeples myself, I have full control over the colors that go into them. In fact, I'm already planning on making a rainbow meeple D20, but sadly, it would not have been ready for today's video. That being said, I'm really digging the addition of orange and purple to the color selection. I actually thought the purple was going to be too dark, but it works. Also, I've got to say, I really love the look of the little clear meeple that I made with the excess resin from the D6. It really drives home the effect you get when you use a pressure pot. Oh, and before I forget, for those of you curious as to the final count of meeples used, these dice ate up 216 meeples, and I could easily fit a few more in some of the dice. Especially the D6. It's got a nice big void there on the one face, but at the same time, because I was going for a base 4 color combination and I wanted to make sure all of the colors were placed into the dice in equal amounts, I really couldn't add more. At most, I think I could fit 3 more meeples in that D6, and that completely throws off my pattern. Also, the D4, those corners are going to be staying empty just because that's too narrow of a space for a meeple. And because these dice use so many, I'm definitely going to want to redesign my molds before I even think of selling these dice sets. All that's left to do is store my dice, and for that, I'm going to be using my new favorite dice storage method. If you're wondering what this is, it's a little tin with a clear front that I picked up at the dollar store of all places. You can find these in the stationery section in a 2-pack, and the best part is, they're magnetic. And that means that if you have anything metal in your gaming area, you can just put a dice set in here and stick it right on. And because I'm classy, I like to use this little baking sheet I picked up at the dollar store. And I gotta say I'm in love. Though I might be replacing it with a pizza pan at some point because I like the circular aesthetic, and that might hold a few more dice sets. Which is a good thing because if this series continues, I'm going to definitely need the space. But that's enough about dice storage solutions. Until next time, this is your guy, Cly, signing off.